the actual aptitude to use technology. I mean, I graduated from college in 1989, so AI is not in my repertoire. Neither is cyber or a lot of things. So I've had to educate myself. But I would love to know if members are doing that in a way that we could track, because we need them to. That's the future, right? I mean, AI is part of the future. Cyber is already part of our future. It's part of our present. But I don't always know or feel comfortable that we're progressing to the skills needed to do those areas justice.
This episode is brought to you by Green Skies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Green Skies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Green Skies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit. Hey everybody, before we jump into the show, I just want to let you know that the Audit Analytics and AI Conference is September 25th and 26th this year. It's all virtual, so no matter where you are in the world, you can absolutely attend. Recordings are also available, so if you are 12 hours away and don't want to be up at 3, 4, 5 in the morning, you can purchase the recordings. This is the only conference that's strictly about analytics and AI for internal audit. So you're going to get your practitioners' use cases. This thing is practitioner-led, save for one speaker that we had this year, but everyone else is in your peer group, ranging from the largest internal audit data analytics teams in the world down to the individual contributor who spends, like, hey, I got 50% of my time I can dedicate towards analytics. Each speaker's mission is to show you how to actually do what they are talking about. So thought leadership is great, and there will certainly be some of that, but for the most part, that's great. We love the thought leadership. Show us how to actually do it. We are currently at 19 speakers and counting, so we're going to add a few more. And you can get up to 19 CPEs if you attend. Check out the link in the show notes, or you can search for Google theauditanalyticsconference.com, and you can register there. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show we have Anthony Pugliese. Anthony is the president and CEO of the IIA, and he's been in that role for a few years now. So we wanted to have him on the show and basically understand, what do you want from the IIA? Like, what can IIA members expect from the IIA / you, Anthony, going forward? And so we can go through this whole vision statement, mission statement, all that kind of good stuff. But we just bluntly asked, what do you want from the IIA, and what do you want it to be? Tying into that is Vision 2035. It's a project that's been underway kind of in the background, and understand what that is, the plans for the project, and any early insights that are emerging from that. That was pretty interesting. Really enjoyed that part of the conversation. And then I feel like the IIA should, and they do, support CAEs. So we talk about issues that CAEs are having and exactly how the IIA is supporting that. And of course, as of the timing of the recording, the IIA had the first of its new IPPF elements out for exposure relative to the topical requirement on cybersecurity. And this has probably been one of the hotter topics relative to the IIA and the internal audit profession. Are these topical requirements? Are they mandated? Do we have to do them? Why are they here in the first place? We've never done this. Why is it mandated versus guidance, for example? And so we definitely go into details around the topical requirements, the current with cybersecurity, and then the future, what the future is going to look like relative to those topical requirements. All right, here we go. What is in your internet browsing or your ChatGPT history of late?
Yeah, well, as of late, it probably would be the same for both my browsing history and my ChatGPT. I try to get a sense when I travel, which is, frequently, and wonderful that I get to do that. I try to get a better feel for how the issues I speak about, like say cyber, ESG, AI, how it's playing out in a particular country. So the only way to do that is I search to understand, for example, what's the biggest issue in Tanzania, where we were a few months ago as a global board, and trying to understand how it equates to some of the data we have. So I'm always searching on what topics are going to be more interesting to the members when I arrive there. I mean, sometimes it's also just to get a handle on local customs and traditions and things that I just need to be cognizant of as an American traveling abroad. But sometimes it's also, what cool stuff am I going to find when I get to this location, which, in my case, with some of the travel we do, it's pretty amazing what's there. And I hate to go somewhere and then realize later I should have done A, B, C, and D instead of hanging out in my hotel room. So a lot about where I'm headed and what I'm going to be seeing.
We've asked that question for a few months now, and something travel related is the number one answer for everyone. And
right. Travel's exciting, right? I get for me anyway, I get excited on every trip, and I have to know where I'm going.
Yeah. I like the planning part as far as, and we talked about this off air, but I like to see what's the history of this area? What's a cool thing that we might walk by and realize or not realize it had we not known. If it wasn't for this thing, right here, it changed the entire world or set this thing in motion. We might not have known it otherwise. But no, the actual planning of flying and hotels and booking that is my worst nightmare. So, all right. With that said, the big overall topic that we wanted to cover was kind of like the vision for the IIA and what that's going to look like. But from that also is the actual vision itself. And you can go to, hire a firm to come in and spend a week with, the entire team and craft this really nice vision. And that's great and wonderful and to put it on paper. But ultimately, for me, when we craft visions with folks relative to their audit analytics, it's about basically, what do you want? Like, hey, CAE, what do you actually want? And then why do you want that? And so, again, for not necessarily the exact vision itself, but Anthony, what do you want the IIA to be, and why do you want it to be that?
Yeah, I think the answer may be deceptively simple, although in execution it becomes a lot more complex. But I think for any association, you have to step back and wonder, are we remaining relevant? Or are we just using the same kind of, processes and, I don't want to say bag of tricks, but the same bag of tricks over and over and over to try to achieve different results. So I always question our relevancy and trying to make sure we're doing everything we can to maintain that. And of course, being relative means you're doing what your members want you to do. And I don't say that just from a U.S. and Canadian perspective, but globally. And we have found a lot of common themes that I don't think we've done as much of in the past as we're doing now. Themes like advocacy tends to really get members' interest high. And they like hearing that we're representing them in forums where they may not have access, or in many cases, they may not even be aware something's occurring. But making sure we have relevance and we remain relevant to our members is our number one goal. And we do that through the development of a strategic plan. And I'm one of those guys that takes strategic plans really, really seriously in terms of tying it to what we're doing every single day and the execution and being able to say, this is what we should focus on. And this is something we can focus on later, or maybe not at all for now. So ensuring IIA has a relevancy to its members, and then making sure our strategic plan reflects that. And that occurs in a variety of ways. But that's what I wake up kind of worried about and go to bed worried about. And relevancy, of course, drives the most germane parts of the business, like membership. People don't want to belong to an organization they don't think is doing what it should be for the profession they're a part of. And again, that's for any association. So my vision is we continue to work on that and look at it and match it to our strategic plan so that we can then discharge on it. So that's a very high level answer. I don't know if that kind of answered your question, but I can go deeper on that if there's anything I said that's
No, I think staying relevant relative to the members and growing it, I think that obviously makes a lot of sense. The thing that I enjoyed about that, what you're speaking to, was a lot of people have a vision and then it kind of just dies. It's just like this nice thing that we wrote up and then that's it. But the thing it sounded like that wakes you up in the morning, keeps you up at night is, are we doing the things daily that tie to that vision so that we ultimately get to what we need, which is an act of discipline. That sounds super easy, but the amount of discipline it takes to execute on that and accountability, I would add, is absolutely insane. So that's good to hear. I think a good segue then would be this Vision 2035 initiative. It's kind of been going on in the background. Can you explain what that is, the plan for the project, any early insights that are emerging from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping you would ask me that. So Vision 2035 is our kind of our litmus test as to, well, let me back up. Let me give you the whole background, if I could quickly, about what we were trying to accomplish and what we have accomplished. Is when I'm traveling and any member of our board travels or senior staff, we hear a lot from members about what's changing in the profession. And some of it's not unexpected when we hear about things like technologies becoming more pervasive. It's hard for us to understand the extent to which we can say that the whole profession is being affected by what we hear from any single member or group of members. So Vision 2035 is trying to figure out, based on what we know now, where we think the profession is headed so that we could say by the year 2035, which was an arbitrary year, it literally sounded better than saying 2034 or
Yeah.
2037,
Yeah.
which is an odd number. So we kind of chose a middle of the road there, 2035. And then through a lot of research, qualitative, quantitative, all the different research vehicles you would expect, and then some, we try to get our hands around trends and what we were seeing that we could look into the future and say, this is where we're headed. And then also have the discipline of saying, we know we're not doing everything we can to achieve the goal that we're seeing in any one area. So, for example, we have found out through our research that there has been a very strong blurring of the lines between the second and third line in our 3 lines model. So we're seeing a lot of risk functions and compliance functions and fraud functions being performed by CAEs or internal audit teams. So what does that mean? Well, my initial response is, without thinking too much about whether vision or the 3 lines model is, becoming in need of examination, where we need to open and look at it again. But I'm happy to hear that CAEs are being entrusted with doing more. That just inherently speaks to the qualifications and the perceptions that we're leaving behind with whatever stakeholder groups, probably including senior management. Like they're the ones making the decisions that a CAE will handle risk, because they see at times the overlap that can occur between the second and third lines. So we're seeing a lot of data on that. That's one thing that 2035 has shown us. And our response to that is what we're trying to figure out now. Like, what do we want to do about that? And what could we do about that? If we agree that our members doing more work in those areas is good, then as an organization, IIA has to start providing more, say, products and services that are geared toward members doing more in risk, as an example. So that would lead us down a path of saying our strategic plan needs to be modified to incorporate that we want to be doing more for our members in the area of risk. Another trend that we've seen is around concern with human capital and how we're going to staff the internal audit function. And that is really one that came in loud and clear around the world. And all these trends did, but this one was exceptionally strong about where do we find people. And I think some of that stems from the fact that there is a current shortfall in accounting graduates, and 80% of our membership globally, 75 to 80%, come from an accounting background, an accounting degree. They may not be chartered accountants or CPAs, but they have an accounting background. And when that part of the profession suffers a pipeline issue, we're just as susceptible to having a problem as anyone else. So we're figuring out now, how do we get more talent to our members, to the CAE, so that they can properly staff the internal audit function in whatever organization. And of course, that's a massive undertaking to swerve supply and demand of an entire profession. And both have to occur at the same time. If you have too many people coming out of school ready to do internal audit and not enough jobs, that also doesn't bode well. So we're focusing right now on looking at how to solve the pipeline issues based on what we've heard in 2035. And I would venture to say we probably need to start doing more. And more would be more on-campus presence, more influence over classroom curriculum, and also looking at the demand side, making sure employers are ready, either through internships or other programs, to start bringing staff on. But generally speaking, the nice thing about that is that internal audit has not had a good visibility to a lot of students that are coming out of accounting programs or even other programs. So we can at least say that there's a lot of opportunity. If we can just show students what kind of job they would have as an internal auditor, and kind of, I would say this, the kind of the fun that's in it, the professional development that's in it, and that there's more than one path if you have that example, an accounting degree. That's our starting point, is to raise awareness and then start influencing curriculum. But I'm not doing that plan justice because it will be rolled out in a global way, and we'll have more on that later. But that's another trend. I think the third one that I'm not surprised at, but I know we need to do more, is that there's a lot of different perceptions of internal audit depending on who you talk to. And the part of that that's good is that a lot of internal auditors are very proud of their work. And I think that we found that our biggest cheerleaders are going to be our own members. But other groups, like, say, board members, audit committee members, have a very antiquated perception of what internal audit can do, mainly by focusing on basically internal controls over financial reporting is what we're famous for, but we want to be famous for so much more, not abandoning that, but adding to the list of things that we can do. And we don't quite have the marketplace acceptance that we would like to think we do with influencing stakeholders. And that also kind of goes into the advocacy work that we do, right? I mean, a lot of legislators and regulators don't know who we are as a profession and as an organization for IIA. So we have to change that. We need board members and audit committee members and senior management and others to understand exactly what we do and why we provide value. So I gave 3 themes at a high level that's coming out of 2035. And we will be rolling it out next month at our international conference in Washington in July. And we'll have, bells and whistles around that. We'll have a microsite that speaks to all the findings. We'll have a formal report. And then that's when it just begins, right? Then the real strategy is behind how to take those ideas and thoughts and decide what a desired state is for the profession, and then how do we get there? So it's really a project about the profession, not about IIA. If anything, it will change IIA, but we've got to start looking at those results and understanding if we're going in the direction we want.
All right, so I thought what was interesting there was on 2 of the 3 points you made. One is this blurring of second and third line functions. And what I hear from that is, hey, audit, you do compliance work, right? So just keep doing the compliance work and keep checking those boxes, right? Which is not how we should be, to your third point, perceived from stakeholders. It should be, nope, you add value to the organization this way, not through, through insights more so than anything, in my opinion, not through compliance activities. So how do we kind of reconcile those 2 issues there with second and third lines getting blurred? And should we just cut that off and that would help change the perception of internal audit? Or how do we wrestle with that? How are you wrestling with that?
Well, you step back and sometimes there's, you see market force trends that are just going to happen whether or not we like them or not. I think that's happened in many respects to a lot of parts of the profession where we just couldn't have predicted that. Maybe we wouldn't have wanted it to head that way, but it just did. And there's just economies with putting areas like risk inside of internal audit. And then to the CEO of an organization or the audit committee, is it better to have a very qualified CAE also doing risk, or to have risk being done by a formal risk function and then also by internal audit? So I think there's a little bit of economies of scale that's occurring, and probably as internal audit grows as a function in an organization, it's being seen as capable of doing more. But we have to examine what's driving the market here and what exactly. So one of the things, although we now know that's a fact, that is compliance, risk, fraud services are all being done more and more by internal audit, the whole spectrum, not just parts of it, but all of it. And then could be parts of it as well. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but kind of a blend between doing more to doing all of it. So we have to now understand why that's happening. And like I made the assumption just now, it's because our members are able to do more and they're more well-versed as time goes by and doing some of these traditional areas. Risk is one of the ones I'm probably most focused on because I could see that as adding more value than some of the traditional work we've done in other areas. Risk sort of has, I don't want to say it got a little bit of sex appeal to it, but it sort of does if you're talking to a board member or to a member of senior management, more so than, say, internal audit's doing a lot more in compliance.
Right.
That's just a little less so. So I want to understand what's driving that. So that's our next step. And then I think we could understand better about what's in the 3 lines model and what stays the same and what we might want to consider looking at. And again, no project has been undertaken on revising 3 lines. All this research is hot off the presses, but we did know enough going into the research to ask that question, what else are you doing? And we knew that because of all the personal visits we've paid, not just me, but board members and our staff, where we synthesize all that, and we were hearing disproportionately, I'm doing more in risk. So we were able to ask that question in a very direct way. So now that we have it confirmed, we'll start analyzing it more.
Okay. I like how you
But
said the risk and the sexiness of that, because I have this line that I say, and that it feels like in audit, all we talk about is risk. You know, like that's all we talk about. And kind of the flip side of that, if you look at it from the other side, is opportunity. And so I try to tell people like risk, opportunity is a different side of the same coin. But basically, instead of like talking about risk all the time, let's talk about the other side of it, which is opportunity, which I think is kind of what you're getting at also. And like compliance isn't really, that's actually risk is there. And then I think above that even is opportunity.
And it's interesting. Some of the other things that we found, I'd mentioned before, stakeholders have a different opinion of us at times than we do of ourselves. I'm going to go with our gut about knowing what we can do. But a lot of stakeholders also, they don't think at times that we have the skill sets to do more. So there's an opportunity there to educate about that. There's a perception that we don't do things that are aligned as a profession that are aligned to an organization's strategic plan. So stakeholders said they would find our work more valuable if we did things that were aligned to support an organization's strategic plan / direction. And there's a number of ways that can be accomplished, but that was just kind of a generic statement to tell us maybe there's some marketplace acceptance of us doing more if it does something to support an organization's strategic plan. And probably a lot of the services we do now do, but that's an opportunity. So helping our members understand how to move up the value chain, so to speak.
I think that's typically, you all probably have the data on it anecdotally, just from doing the podcast and talking to CAEs and auditors. That's where I feel like the biggest opportunity is. There's still so many people, it seems like, that don't look at supporting the strategic objectives of the organization. And it's just, we haven't done payroll in 3 years, so let's go look at payroll again. I go, why are you looking at payroll? Well, we just haven't done it in a long time. And it goes, I thought that was, like, I thought we were past that, but it's still, it seems, again, anecdotally, pretty prevalent.
It's interesting. A lot of it. So at IIA, we have an internal audit function, and I've asked them to actually look at things that, in the back of my head, I can be concerned about. I hope that's going well, because if it's not, then we're not going to achieve this part of our strategic plan. And, teams are very optimistic. They're very eager to get things done. And at times it takes a fresh set of eyes to understand where we may be tripping over ourselves. So we ask our internal audit function to look at how's our global operating model working? How's our North American operating model working? And are we making the steps to get to a different model or outcome? And it's surprising how they come back with such incredible data. And every time I have one of those meetings, I can't wait to hear it, because it's probably something I should be worried about or concerned about or capitalizing on if it's a strength that we're not using as much as we could. But it's as easy as that. Pivot into having internal audit support the strategic plan. Is just asking a CEO or senior level of management or a board, what are you worried about that we do that may not be in line with achieving our goals? There's some lower level things you can do to kind of start supporting a strategic plan than, jumping in and having to learn a whole new service or a whole new approach.
Right. Okay. This got me thinking, as you're talking about just the amount of data that you all consume, take in, and that's presented to you. And it seems like a lot of it is probably through some kind of feedback mechanism. So it's not just choose yes or no when you go, oh, okay,
Yeah.
So if you had a dashboard, what would be the one thing that you would want on that dashboard that you would check, maybe daily, maybe weekly? The timing might be different depending on what that thing is, but there's one thing and you go, I just want to see this one thing, and I know if we're good with this one thing that I'm good to go. What would that be?
If it could be as abstract as I wanted it to
Whatever
be,
you want.
it would be if internal auditors are here with technology understanding, how are we moving to get them up here with a technology understanding? And that's across a spectrum of topics. We now just say digital disruption, right? To kind of capture all the technologies that are out there that are affecting what internal auditors do. But just like with other professions, like I'd say the public accounting profession or legal profession, that the actual aptitude to use technology. I mean, I graduated from college in 1989, so AI is not in my repertoire. neither is cyber or a lot of things. So I've had to educate myself. But I would love to know if members are doing that in a way that we could track, because we need them to. That's the future, right? I mean, AI is part of the future. Cyber is already part of our future. It's part of our present. But I don't always know or feel comfortable that we're progressing to the skills needed to do those areas justice, or to continue to build our kind of our baseline skills in IT, especially for those that are, a little bit older and didn't have a lot of this training in college formally. So I'd love to have a report, even if it showed tiny little increases about where our members were with their understanding, their skill sets, their baselines in IT.
Okay. I like it. As a tech person, I really like it. All right. I feel like if we didn't talk about topical requirements, then I would probably get a bunch of angry letters and LinkedIn messages from people. So topical requirement, first one is on cybersecurity. I'm sure you are aware there's been some negative feedback to those, and why do we have to do this? I want guidance. I don't want to have to do this thing. This doesn't align to my risk plan or my audit plan, and so on. So talk us through the IIA's perspective of this is why we're doing topical requirements. I don't necessarily care about why cybersecurity was the first one. I think, that makes a ton of sense, but where did it come from? And then why are these being seemingly enforced upon internal auditors? That seems to be the biggest gripe that I've seen from folks.
Yeah. And, I've seen some of that on social media. It's probably important to note that the vast majority of the respondents that have replied to our topical requirements on cyber were positive. And they were far more just editorial, like, do this, do that. Here's an edit. You made a mistake here. This is good. So the vast majority has been very positive, because it came from a request from members, not one member or two, but a lot of members when we did our original surveying work on what needed to be changed in the IPPF, just overall. And the request was that there be more specific guidance around certain topical areas so that the members could do more. And so as we examined that, we realized that a lot of our members were turning to other sources to do the work that they were doing in areas like cyber. And, what could we do to remain relevant and also to achieve a certain amount of minimum levels of performance around the world of very critical topics like cyber, or ESG. That's not as big a deal here in the U.S. It's actually kind of a polarizing topic now in the U.S. versus Europe and the rest of the world. But the request was, give us more specificity about the minimum things to do. And I don't mean like an audit checklist like we would have for cash or something like that. It was really more detail, more insight on what to do. And, as we go around the world, that's a pretty fair request, as we see a lot of internal audits. The profession is somewhat new in parts of the world, or newer than here. So it was to help us better understand how we can have conformance, level of expectations from our members on how they do work in this area. Remember, it's only for assurance work, and it's only if you were going to do cyber anyway. It's not a requirement to do cyber or to do cyber at the assurance level, although topical requirements can be used in advisory capacity as well if you wanted to do a readiness assessment. But if you read the topical requirements, I think that they're like 10 pages, 10 to 12 pages for cyber, depends on the font. Somebody hands it to me that they printed it in. It's pretty generic. It's like assess. We aren't trying to replicate anyone else's work. We're not trying to do the work of NIST or ISACA or trying to do anything that's out of our wheelhouse, but really, how do we raise the performance in these critical areas of the profession, areas that we aren't traditionally trained in, but we're doing a lot of work in. And having standards that speak to that was our approach. And it was vetted by our standards board, our global board, North American board. So as far as it being something that was seen and heard, our global assembly, boards of directors of other IIA affiliates that I've traveled to and spoken to, very popular, very well received. Of course, the devil's in the detail, always, especially with standards. But that was our thinking and our background, and we've had positive reaction. Now, it also benefits us as a profession that when we speak to regulators or legislators, that we're able to speak to a level of, again, kind of a level of consistency in how our members deliver these services. Because when I met with a lawmaker on Capitol Hill, the question I had was, well, how do you know what your members are doing in cyber? And we were specifically looking at a proposed cyber bill. And, it was kind of one of those moments where you're like, we don't yet, but when we have this in place, we will have an understanding of the baseline of what our members are doing. I don't think that standard should ever be taken as the holy grail and all that should be done. It's very different according to the company you're in, and some are more mature than others. It's really the baseline. So without rambling too much, that was the rationale behind topical requirements. It's only going to be on mature topics like cyber. Having a topical requirement on AI right now would not be probably well advised, at least not this year.
Yeah.
Maybe not next year either. But we do think third-party risk, cyber, probably ESG over time could become topics that would be lend themselves to topical requirements.
So a lot of the guests that we have on the show are CAEs or internal audit leaders. They are kind of, in my opinion, the face of the profession, even more so than you, the president and CEO of the IIA, because they're the ones that are in the field. There's the perception of internal audit, in my opinion, comes from the leadership of a CAE and how they are perceived in their organization. And so I'm a big fan of supporting CAEs, especially on the E part, in terms of encouraging them and helping them become executives. So you're no longer an auditor, you're an executive when you become a CAE, and getting people to kind of understand that as well. So what is the IIA doing, with all that said, what's the IIA doing to support CAEs? And then if you specifically grow them as executives?
Well, we have a section here at IIA for CAEs. We've renamed it. I think it's Audit Leaders Network now. So there is a section that's tailored for the needs of CAEs, and membership in that section comes with a lot of benefits. But in general, I think our development of and deployment of training and technical literature around emerging topics is really important, that I think a lot of CAEs find extremely valuable, especially if they also need something to talk to an audit committee or a board or management about in terms of the work that they need to do. So on the topical requirement question, one of the things that we did get was, you guys should have a standard so I can show that to my board about what level of work needs to be done, because there's a lot of resistance, internal audit moving in and hiring more staff and doing the work that I think we need to do. But that's one area, training, standards, but also in the advocacy realm is making sure the voice of internal audit is heard everywhere, which should make the job of a CAE easier, especially when that is meant to increase visibility into the profession. A little bit less or more abstract than having training and so forth that's available for CAEs. Also working on the pipeline issue, which was the number one concern of the CAEs in the vision report that we did, that we spoke about earlier, is that supply of talent is becoming very, very dire. So us beginning to move into that direction and start supporting our members by helping the pipeline is another area.
Got it. Yeah, we ask, again, anecdotally, but we ask CAEs the number one issue you're dealing with or the number one issue you discuss with your peers. And it's been hiring and retention for, I don't know, the better part of a year and a half, probably even further than that. But so I'm sure they all appreciate that. Well, as much as we appreciate also you coming on, sharing your thoughts, I know there's a lot out there. You're obviously publicly available in the sense of content that you guys put out and you being on social media and things of that nature. But I know especially with topical requirements was something that people really wanted to hear, your voice on. So we appreciate that. With that said, what do you want to leave the audience with?
I would leave the audience with a request to check out the Vision 2035 work that we've done. I mean, a lot of it will be a call to action, for members in terms of their own skill set enhancement, making sure that they're up to speed on that and always analyzing that, but also in other areas to be advocates for the profession. So I won't get into all the recommendations that'll be in that project, but I would really ask our members, around the world, whoever's tuning into this, to take a look at it and tell us what you think. It's statistically accurate, but we'd love to know thoughts on the directions that we've looked at, because we're in the process now of trying to figure out what to do with all that research and make it actionable. So hearing from our members is key.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.